One way or another, the war in Ukraine will come to an end. And depending on the circumstances, Vladimir Putin might have some interesting decisions to make. And heck, those decisions might create a causal loop that accelerates the end of the war. Or at least that is the subject of the lead question of today's rapid-fire edition of the Geopolitics HelpLINE. As a reminder, you can leave your questions in the comments section below, or when I make specific calls in community posts. I have also outlined today's questions in the usual rough ordering. First Ukraine, then Iran, then war more generally, then academic international relations, and then nonsense. And my goodness, is today's final question absolute nonsense. Don't forget that you can use the chapters function to skip around. And with that, let's get to it. Many people say that Putin has painted himself into a corner. If he gives up the war, and Crimea, then nowhere will be safe for him, either in Russia's sphere of influence or the West. Well, imagine that the British Secret Service offers him a deal. He disappears, maybe his death is faked somehow, and they will set him up with a new identity as Victor Kevin from Massachusetts. It seems very unfair that he escapes justice, but on the credit side, the end of a murderous war and a good settlement is a high prize. Would he accept? Could it have the desired effect on the war? And would the Secret Service ever make such an offer? Let me preface this with the caveat that I do not think that Putin is in much political risk if he just freezes the front line and forces Ukraine into a settlement around there. The internet frenzy of Crimea being 2 minutes away from being a lost cause is, well, the internet doing its thing. As a result, his need to go into any form of exile at the end of the war, China, somewhere in the Middle East, or otherwise, is low. Correspondingly, there is even less incentive for him to go into exile in the middle of the war just to get out of it. But let's suppose that is wrong. Then I still do not think that Putin will be itching to get out of the country. He is not in a situation where the next leader would be an anti-Putin. He would step down, and then someone from his Politburo would replace him, and they would use the same illiberal democracy playbook to keep the machine turning. A new leader only feels the need to jail or otherwise disappear the old leader when the old leader poses a political threat to him. In this hypothetical, though, Putin is unpopular and cannot stage a comeback as a result. Never mind that he is getting too old for that. Nonetheless, let's assume he is dead if he loses power and stays in the country. Despite the viewer's hypothetical deal being better for Putin and the West in theory, it just does not work out in practice. It is a classic credible commitment problem. As soon as Putin agrees to it and leaves the country, he holds no more bargaining power, and the special forces can just detour their plane to The Hague. Next question. What would happen to Russia's economy if a hypothetical mobilization occurred in waves? Suppose, for example, Russia is constrained by its training capacity and can only bring the 30,000 or so troops it currently does every month. Thanks for the €5. This is in reference to the video I made on how wage pressures will respond to the mobilization. And the scenario that the viewer suggests here would be about as bad as you can imagine for workers. The Ministry of Defense would still drop their high contract offers, meaning that businesses will no longer have to compete with those wages to attract employees. Meantime, you do not get a sudden labor shock causing wages to rise. The silver lining is that there will still be a trickle, but that pressure is already built into how wages currently work. The one thing that I will add here is that I doubt Russia will maintain the 30,000 per month figure. This would sustain the political chaos of mobilization for a year and a half, and there would be no benefit on the front line beyond what is already baked in there. And while I suspect they may not be literally able to handle 500,000 soldiers at once, bear in mind that Russia conscripts about 250,000 new soldiers every year aside from the Ukraine war. There is infrastructure in place to immediately increase training for Ukraine, ignoring whatever Russia adds for that purpose. Next question. Do you believe that Kyiv is playing a dangerous game by attacking Wildberries locations? These attacks are resulting in average Alexanders being killed or injured. Could this backfire and cause a rally round the flag effect, especially if all the other average Alexanders are being fed a Putin-controlled narrative that this is Russia's 9/11? A rally round the flag effect could result in support for a mass mobilization, and even a sense of nationalism in individuals to go join. Thank you for the $9.99. We have discussed this a couple of times before, but I think it is worth revisiting now that we are weeks into the operation and everything is compounding. And yet there is still little indication that the Russian public is rushing to Putin's side. Perhaps one new thing worth noting is that Ukraine would have thought long and hard about this question, including with information that only its intelligence organizations have access to. And the conclusion that they drew to greenlight this whole thing was that everything was going to be okay. And so far, so good for them. Next question. You noted that whether mobilization backfires or has a silver lining economically depends on careful analysis. Given that Putin is not an economist, how do authoritarian regimes monitor and verify the work of technical experts, where dissent or bad news is risky to deliver, compared to more easily verifiable domains like military compliance or corruption crackdowns? Is there any meaningful difference between highly technical economic analyses and battlefield reports? Thank you for the $14.99. A lot of this depends on how institutionalized the autocracy is. Technical expertise did not go very far under, say, Saddam Hussein, because the government under him was, well, mostly him. Not for the literal execution of executions or other policies, but unless you were a hydrocarbon scientist, your opinion did not matter much. Russia is different in that there is still an institutional framework that exists without Vladimir Putin, and there are enough technocrats floating around the Kremlin that there is room for actually effective policies to come into effect. That is especially true for central bankers. What is notably different here as compared to the problem that got this war started is that Putin's military leadership did not want to admit to having slacked off, even if it meant entrapping Russia into a war. Fiscal questions like, if we borrow $10 billion, what will that do to interest rates, are factual points and not matters of effort. And there is common interest from both the central bank and Putin to get it right. Thus, Putin is more likely to get real answers. What he wants to do with that information afterward is up to him, of course. Next question. Wouldn't the domestic incentives for Loomer and the pro-Israel groups also benefit from combining less popular positions with Ukraine? Maybe, and thank you for the $5. But insofar as that was Loomer's goal, it has not worked. The mainstream media coverage of her trip to Ukraine focused almost entirely on her flip on that position, and nothing else. To the extent that if you did not know who she was already, you might be in for a few surprises if you read her Wikipedia page. She is just one of the MAGA voices who has flipped on Ukraine, which is warranting the conversation on that part, but that is apparently where the media interest stops. Next question. Has the war in Iran affected the invasion of Ukraine? Do you think Zelensky sees it as a positive? And do you think we will see Ukraine get more involved in the conflict? Thank you for the $20 dues. I suspect that Zelensky does not view it as negatively as the common perspective that you will get from reading Western media commentary. I am sure that he is frustrated to see all of those ATACMs burned over Iran, but he might have accepted long ago that he was never going to get those anyway. And conditional on that, would you rather see them sitting in a warehouse somewhere, or destroying targets in a country that has been assisting Russia for the duration of the invasion? Probably the latter. There is a reason that Ukraine was striking an Iranian weapons shipment in the Caspian a couple of weeks ago. I cannot see Ukraine making a serious effort against Iran, though, because they have bigger fish to fry at home. Next question. Given recent reports on the dwindling Interceptor stockpiles, how much longer do you think the U.S. will have available material to protect its assets with interceptors in the region? Do you believe that stockpiles will run out before the November midterms? How big of an effect would this have on the elections? Do you think Iran will lose its ability to launch material at the U.S. before the U.S. runs out of interceptors to respond? Thank you for the $19.99. It is hard to answer those questions directly because we would have to set expectations on the average daily intensity of the conflict. Obviously, interceptor availability is weighing on the minds of those in the Pentagon. I have long said that it makes more sense for the United States to forego strikes and just maintain the blockade along the strait until Iran submits to full freedom of navigation. Where this could get hairy is if Iran, realizing that this will break the country economically, reinitiates kinetic action in the Gulf. Then that raises questions about how partners in the region will view the situation. Will they see Iran as the instigator and want to fight back, even if interceptors cannot protect them? Or will the absence of interceptors mean that they pressure the United States to lift the blockade, even at the cost of restrictions on the strait? A clear answer there is above my pay grade. But at least note that the timing there is disconnected from the midterm elections, because the primary political issue domestically is the cost of fuel, and that has little direct connection to the interceptors. Next question. Looking at the pipes on maps of regional energy infrastructure, we see new lines being drawn, particularly involving Iraq. Do these expanding bypass lines mean that Iran's physical leverage over the Strait of Hormuz has an expiration date, which encourages Iran to use its leverage while it can? Yes, and this raises a few points worth covering. 1. Unlike pipelines that just push oil to a sea terminal past Hormuz, these pipelines are not nearly as vulnerable. With the other countermeasure, Iran can just strike the oil terminals. In contrast, these pipelines are further away and easier to repair. And 2, Iran really only got one good shot at the Hormuz thing. Between Iraq, as you mentioned, another pipeline project that might head out to Egypt, and countries like China adapting to life without Gulf oil, using this lever in the future will not be as effective. It is hard to say whether Iran viewed Hormuz as a closing window, or if these projects reflect expectations regarding Iran's proactive ability to shut down the strait, but either way, the long-run effects will look similar. Next question. Is it better to control inbound or outbound traffic along the Strait of Hormuz? Well, the running expectation is that inbound ships will be closer to Iran's coastline, and outbound ships will be closer to Oman's coastline. I would say that this is marginally better for global stability than the alternative. If a full tanker has an issue, it is probably better for Oman to provide assistance. Iran only gets the empty ones coming through. But this is still a marginal difference. If Iran were to ever close the strait again, no one is going to think to themselves, Iran said no more ships can pass, but surely they will follow the rules that we agree to and allow these outbound vessels to escape unharmed. Next question. As I understand it, our current global trade system relies on undisputed freedom of the seas, which in turn relies on American, or Western-aligned, naval dominance. With Iran, and to a lesser extent the Houthis, demonstrating that dominance can be circumvented, this leads me to speculate about what the consequences might be if the dust settles with Iran charging a toll. Several things come to mind, but one thing sticks out. Sharply increasing the cost of shipping would be very hard on China's business model, which would severely hurt their long-term prospects. Would this lead to an even greater closing window incentive for China to take military action, or am I misreading the implications? Thank you for the 10 polite dollars. I think we have reached the point where the concern about Iran imposing a toll on the Strait of Hormuz has become as apocalyptic as it is inaccurate. Just focusing on the direct consequences, you would think that it would be the end of the modern economy as we know it, at least according to what people are saying. But here's the thing. This would be an improvement over the status quo. And we already know that the world will persist, albeit a little bit poorer, when gasoline sits at $4 a gallon. This is not like the 1970s, where oil is hard to source elsewhere. So if there ought to be any more serious concern here, it needs to come from other countries imposing their own tolls at other choke points. And I think that is far from certain. Very few other countries want to be as diplomatically isolated as Iran is, and imposing tolls is a good way to achieve that negative status. Thinking about China specifically, the crisis has already led Beijing to take steps to become more energy independent, which leaves one fewer lever for Western countries to push down in the event of an invasion of Taiwan. I suppose that a permanent toll would further cement China's energy independence push, but it would not have the same magnitude of effect as the shutdown already has. Next question. Imagine a hypothetical where it is Tomahawks rather than ATACMS and Prisms that are depleted, as is the case right now with Iran. Can you come up with a rationale for why that would be the right choice? Why you would deplete them in Iran? No. Elsewhere, yeah, if the PRC has invaded Taiwan. Tomahawks are the best weapon for that job, and it is the most important task that the US Navy will face in a generation. There is no point in holding anything back. Fire at will. Fire at the PRC. Please do not fire at me. Next question. What should Eastern Europe do to capture the attention of the West to finally stop treating it as that place that's still recovering from the Cold War? And thank you for the 100 Czech crowns. I suppose that bribery does not hurt the effort to gather attention, but the answer really is money, better directed at military spending than YouTube lobbying. The reason that other countries have to care about Poland, for example, is because Poland spends like it needs to prepare for war, and it has the industrial capacity to expand further on that front if it felt like doing so. Thoughts and prayers do not enhance a country's intra-coalition standing. The ability to offer to send some reserve supply of patriots does. Where are the lines on the map in Gaza right now? The metaphorical ones, I mean. There's Israel, Hamas, the Palestinian Authority, the Board of Peace, Trump, and Tony Blair, apparently. I'm lost. Could seeing some lines on maps make it easier to follow? I frankly do not know, but at this point, a bribe to my favorite YouTube game theorist is as good a bet as any. And thank you for the 49.9 new Israeli shekels. Not the old ones, mind you, only the new ones. As far as I can tell, it is remarkable how little of the fundamentals of that conflict have changed in years, and decades if we wanted to be cheeky about it. Israel still has an incentive to root out all of Hamas given the organization's weakened position, and how stopping would undo a lot of that effort. Then you still have Netanyahu's personal incentive to prolong the war to avoid prosecution. Maybe we will revisit this in October after the election. Next question. Given the world at war framing, and the new arrow between Iran and Ukraine on your diagram, can these arrows and their growing interlocking be modeled as a cascading set of bargaining tools? For example, the Ukraine attack on the Iran-Russia shipment is a cascade effect of the fact that the United States mostly prevents Iran from getting oil revenue, which itself is a tool for Iran to further pressure the United States, which in turn pushes the United States to lift sanctions on Belarus so that Ukraine can afford to attack the shipments in the first place, with this circle having all sorts of branches and loops. And thank you for the $20. In a word, yes. This is getting at the idea of wars of opportunism, where one conflict sets up a temporary window for another state to take an action it might not otherwise have an opportunity to do again. What we do not discuss as much, and what this question highlights, is the opposite side of that coin. Conflicts can also set up opportunities to reach agreements with states that were otherwise objectionable, simply to unwedge them from a current bloc. One thing worth noting about this is that there can be a race to the bottom. If unsticking the first partner is more valuable than unsticking the second, then you might have a situation where multiple partners are looking to jump ship before another does, which can sow distrust into the coalition. Next question. How do phosphate reserves in the disputed Western Sahara territory impact bargaining frictions and potential interstate conflict? Could the recent events in Ceuta be viewed through this lens as well? Thank you for the $5. I do not want to discuss Ceuta in depth right now because that would be a very long topic on its own. My self-respecting academic alter ego is more qualified to discuss the point about phosphate reserves in Western Sahara, so let me stick to that. And the two non-obvious things worth noting there are the same as you might hear about any natural resource. One, it is commonplace for joint ventures to split the revenues from natural resource extraction, and therefore obviate the need to fight wars over disputed territory. And two, the theoretical relationship between the presence of valuable resources and war is nebulous, because it is possible that higher prize values mitigate bargaining frictions that arise when there is uncertainty over the physical costs of war. The one-sentence explanation of this idea is that a valuable prize makes the difference in the possible cost-to-prize ratios smaller, which clusters together potential red lines and therefore encourages safer demands. Next question. Recently, the United States has been in a trade spat with Brazil. Tariffs have been put into place, and the central focus of the dispute right now is the Brazilian payment system PIX. This is strange because trade between the United States and Brazil seems to be largely beneficial to the United States, given that Brazil is one of the few countries that the United States has a large and long-standing trade surplus with. Any thoughts? Only a couple, because international political economy is a step past my personal expertise. And thank you for the 55 Brazilian reals. I really appreciate it. For the uninitiated, Pix is a new government-run payment system in Brazil. It is a threat to other payment systems run by U.S. companies like Visa and MasterCard. So the source of the dispute seems to be Trump using trade as a leverage to break Pix and protect those incumbent U.S. companies. Or it is just an excuse for his general desire to impose tariffs everywhere. You can see the latter effect clearly right now, with Trump using a forced labor clause in existing U.S. law to tariff a bunch of countries like Switzerland and Norway, which are not exactly known for their institutional protection of slavery. Anyway, at least in this particular case, Pix is a system that a more vanilla U.S. president might initiate a dispute over. There is a conflict of interest when the regulator of the company is also the owner of the company. And it is easy for this to fall into a situation where the Brazilian government mandates the use of its own platform and also decides on fee structures, which starts broaching anti-competitive policies. I cannot tell you who is right here because that is literally the type of thing that gets sorted out in a trade court. The only thing that I can say is that you should not immediately tune out this one just because Trump and tariff are uttered in the same sentence. Next question. There is a Selectorate Theory question that I have wondered about. If I recall correctly, large coalition leaders in democracies only fight if they can win. Autocrats are happy to try a land grab, but back off with no shame if it does not work out. That made sense to me when I read it in 2022, but Russia had just invaded Ukraine, is now at a stalemate, and fights on despite that prediction. What does crisis bargaining theory have to say about all of this? Thank you for the $10. Actually, this is a point that I teach in my Intro to International Relations class. The size of winning coalitions and the pool of potential supporters varies between autocracies and democracies. They create different first-order incentives for how leaders view war versus peace in a vacuum. But these characteristics are readily observable for opposing countries, and so the net effect gets washed out in bilateral bargaining. For example, suppose that democracies are indeed loath to fight unless they are likely to win the war. Then opponents recognize that fact and ratchet up their demands, precisely because the democracy will be hesitant to fight. Consequently, the main effect here is not on war versus peace, but rather where the demands are. Next question. Hitler is a person often described as irrational. If crisis bargaining theory can help us understand him, what were the primary bargaining frictions in retrospect that caused Germany to invade Poland, France, and later much more? Why couldn't the various actors reach a negotiated settlement which would have left everyone better off? Thank you for the 65 Swedish crowns. Too bad those were not 1940s crowns, then adjusted for inflation afterward. Anyway, it is fashionable even in social science circles to describe Hitler as irrational. I think that is a cop-out, at least for the start of the war. Indeed, I would argue that there is a clear case for a disagreement in the expected outcome, and so you have a war based on private information. Usually the counter to that is that Hitler's optimism was irrationally inflated, but I think it is easy to forget that Hitler actually got pretty close to conquering Moscow. Next question. What's up with your beef with contractions? Thank you for the $10. Contractions are harder to follow for non-native English speakers, so I strike almost all of them from my scripts. That's it. That's the only reason why. Next question. If you were in the chair of the teenager from the movie WarGames, WarGames, that's actually going to come up again later, keep that one in mind. If you were in the chair of the teenager from the movie WarGames, what would you have realistically told Whopper? Thank you for the 300 Thai bots. I would have probably explained to it that there should always exist settlements that are mutually preferable to war. I would not try teaching it something as trivial as how tic-tac-toe under optimal play results in a draw. I cannot imagine that something so basic would change its mind, and I feel that the writers of the movie got themselves stuck in a corner, needing something that would be dumb enough for a 1980s audience to understand so that they could end the movie in a way that they wanted to. Alright, last question. Which professional wrestler would make the best president in a crisis bargaining scenario? Assume kayfabe. For the uninitiated, kayfabe means that we are pretending that their on-screen personas are real, which will be important in a minute. Also, thank you for the $20. I cannot believe that I'm getting paid to answer this, which has to be the greatest question of all time. Some initial thoughts. John Cena seems like a good choice. Put him in the ballgame against Russia. He will be completely destroyed over the course of the first 4 years of war, but then suddenly he hits the 5 moves of doom, and now Putin is done. But that is not really a quality of a president. Better save him for chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Then again, he was president in the film Heads of State, which is the greatest movie about NATO politics of all time. Jesse Ventura and Kane would seem like logical choices as governor of Minnesota and mayor of Knoxville, respectively, but those jobs were for their real-life counterparts. Triple H comes to mind as someone good at politicking and being a cerebral assassin. But I suspect that part of being president in the scenario requires actually staying president, and it is only a matter of time before someone uncovers the Katie Vick tape and he gets impeached. And if you are wondering who Katie Vick is, no, this is a family show about war. Also, let us take a moment to reflect how the real-life son-in-law of the actual Secretary of Education was involved in that whole Katie Vick affair. Anyway, Sergeant Slaughter would make sense as someone with a military background and experience as an authority figure, until you remember that he was basically guilty of treason during the Gulf War. Paul Heyman is probably not who you would want to be the president, but slot him in as the national security advisor, and you will improve whomever we finally choose as president. William Regal was actually one of the first people who came to mind. He's diplomatic and, again, has experience as an authority figure. But 2 problems. 1, he is British, so he cannot actually be president. And 2, even if you made him prime minister, he would have a nasty habit of seeing an oncoming conflict, and rather than trying to defuse the situation, he would schedule a press conference, walk to the podium, yell, "WarGames!" and leave. Not exactly the type of temperament you want from a president. If we now think that gaslighting is an important quality of a president, then all hail Becky Lynch. And it is not just me saying it. Sports Illustrated is saying it. The Bleacher Report is saying it. But nope, she's Irish. If this were a question about who should be Secretary General of NATO, I would pick Roman Reigns. He is great at getting his allies to intervene. Article 5 would never be in doubt. But all told, I think I'm going to choose someone a little obscure. Adam Pearce. His tenure as an authority figure is among the longest in history. He is consistently on the brink of losing his mind because of all of the chaos that surrounds him, but he manages to keep holding it together year after year. He'll probably need a drink after the crisis ends, but that is okay. And I am sorry that was not a more exciting answer, but you probably do not want someone exciting to be handling your crisis bargaining. Anyway, now that my retention metrics are officially shot, it is time for me to remind you to like, share, and subscribe, and that I will see you tomorrow. Take care.